Moms and Master Books. Hope you're having a fantastic week so far. Hey, today I am joined by my lovely wife, Kristen. She is also the author of the Language Lessons for a Living Education, and she is the curriculum development editor. I know what her title is now. So I talked her into joining me today to talk about a topic that we see often here in relation to Master Books. And this one came up over the weekend in regards to people who struggle with the short lessons that are in the curriculum. And so I have a lot to say about that. I'm very opinionated on that. And Kristen's going to try to bring balance to that today. So. Okay, so language lessons for a living education. Very briefly, what is the heart behind that series?
Well, let's talk with the title. So when I was developing this and I was thinking through what I wanted this to look like and the feel of it, the whole approach of it, I thought, it really mirrors what Angela has done in math lessons for a living education. And so I asked Angela if she would mind if I borrowed her title and put it in. And if she had said no, I would have said great and come up with something else. But it really captures the heart of this series. And the reason why a living education is practical. It's not just learning rules for the sake of learning rules so that we can appear like we're smart and be know-it-alls and say, oh, well, you just used a direct object incorrectly. Because those types of people are kind of offensive and get a lot of rebuke and pushback in society. It doesn't help endear them to people. So I
try not to do that.
My approach was not to make little grammar geniuses. My approach was to be practical and to teach our children how to communicate, and wherever rules, whether they be grammar, spelling, or any of the rules go, how do we apply them? We're not learning rules for rules' sake, but to improve our communication.
Right.
And so when we say a living education, what that means is it's applied. It's very practical. It's not just, okay, we have to meet state requirements. We do. I get that. We have to make sure that we are checking off all the bells and whistles. However, that's just something that we're forced to do. Mm-hmm. What the heart is to make it so that our children become good communicators. And why does that matter to me personally? Is it so that when my kids go to college, some professor can be wowed by their academic prowess? No. The heart for me is so that they can express the gospel, so that when this evil, wicked world that we are raising up these little warriors for the Lord in, have the opportunity when they are adults to share their faith, they can communicate that faith effectively. And so that's the heart behind even doing a language arts lessons, because for me, I was always good at it, but a lot of it was a waste of time. And so learning some of this stuff just for the sake of learning it just doesn't make sense to me. And when I was teaching my children, because we have, an older set and a younger set, I couldn't find the right balance in that. It just seemed like those that are in love with grammar killed the usefulness and killed the joy in it. And so I didn't want that for my younger kids. And then, then I had the other balance of, well, it's now simple. I found things that were simplified, but either they were completely out of step with today's language. And, I do like to look at things that are old, but I also like things that are new as well. And so, yeah, my kids have to know current type things that are going on. And so I didn't want it so simple that they didn't know the basics of grammar. I didn't want it so old that they were out of touch with today's world. And I didn't want studying some of this stuff just for the sake of studying it.
Right.
So you get rid of all of that. And another part of it is I didn't want so much repetition that it almost punishes somebody who gets it quickly and easily and just fills up their day with what in the Charlotte Mason world with twaddle, which is just to keep them busy. I love keeping my kids busy. Don't get me wrong. But I would rather them be busy with something that matters, which is something that you brought up about, maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but in our discussions beforehand, if they're not so burdened down with underlining, 500 nouns that day, they'll actually have time to read, which is really important.
Yeah.
For
You're
brain
taking
development.
my interview.
I'm sorry.
I get accused of not doing good interviews, so we're doing this. Okay, so let's unpack it a little bit. So the heart is a very practical application.
Yes.
It's not less is more. It's give them what they need.
Right.
And so following that 80-20 rule type thing in some ways, but in other ways, like you followed a traditional scope and sequence. Yes. So what curriculum would this be on par with? Would it be on par with BJU, Abeka, as far as language goes, the scope and sequence?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it was BJU was one of them that you had looked at.
There were a lot of them. I used a lot of different things and kind of got a feel for each level, what's generally taught. Now, but I used multiple. I didn't stick with just one.
Okay. But it followed, from first grade to sixth grade,
generally speaking, but I tried to keep it reasonable because to me, I feel that some of the more advanced ones, they go so far ahead and so deep into grammar and the kid can't even write a good sentence. That was my experience with some of my children. Now, not all of them, because some of them were great writers right out of the get-go that just seemed to click. But a lot of my writers, they're learning advanced concepts and I'm still reminding them to start their sentence with a capital letter, and end with actually use punctuation and not have one paragraph that's a run-on sentence, one long, that's what my kids love to do too. So, so even though I compared scope and sequences, I was really careful not to add too much too quick as far as some of the concepts go. So I just didn't want the kids to struggle with some of that.
So you didn't copy anybody else. It was basically an idea of what's being taught by the different publishers.
Right.
And then a common sense approach to building a good communicator.
Correct.
Okay.
I could agree with that.
So I would like to say, I know a lot of people in our past who knew the rules of grammar, who knew a lot more about grammar, but couldn't communicate to save their life.
Correct.
And communication is more than rules. Communication requires brain power because you're actually having to analyze, deduct, you're looking for comparisons, you're looking for a lot of different contrast, cause and effects. All of these things are part of communication. So what I love about Language Lessons for a Living Education is you enact different parts of the brain to communicate. It's not just the way we learned grammar, where it was pages of circle the noun, put one underline under the noun, two underlines under the verb, circle the pronoun, whatever.
And we do a little bit of that just so that they understand it in the context of a sentence, but I'm more interested in apply. Let me see you use adjectives in a sentence.
Okay. So that leads to the next thing that I think is so important for our market to understand. We are very eclectic. Would you agree? we like applications from different educational styles that work, that make sense. We're not, though, married to one style to the point that we exclude every other good idea that's out there.
Yes.
So we, in cases like language lessons for living education, we would call it a Charlotte Mason influenced approach,
Right.
because there are components from the Charlotte Mason method that you really appreciate. One of those is short lessons.
Yes. And the reason that I appreciate short lessons, and there's a lot of brain psychology behind this, when you dump so much on a kid per day, they have a tendency to shut down and it becomes overwhelming. And that's where the tears come in. Now, is a kid never going to struggle with a concept in language lessons? You know, that's not also that's not reality. There's going to be some kids that no matter if it's short lessons, long lessons, they're just going to struggle and need extra work at it.
Right.
But for the average student, they shouldn't dread having to do their language arts. It shouldn't be so painful that their mind starts to shut down and becomes in an unhealthy, taxed way. Whenever we're learning something new, it's exhausting on the brain. And so by that definition, there's always going to be, whenever they're learning something new, some challenge. And there's a healthy challenge in that. But that healthy challenge can cross the line to being overwhelming and they shut down. Because
the brain is built to avoid pain.
Yes.
And so once you cause the stress and the pain to engage in the brain starts saying, I need to get out of this.
Yes.
And it'll start to shut down. It'll temper tantrum. It'll do whatever it takes to kind of get out of this pain.
Right.
I think the old style was, then it's like training horses. We'll tie you up, throw tin cans at you, beat you until you submit to what we want.
Right.
Right. You break their spirit.
Right. Right.
This style is more of we're not going to break your spirit. We're going to give you a healthy doses so that we don't push you into that fight or flight mechanism where the brain begins to experience the stress hormones and all of that creativity just begins to die.
Right. And what I love is to see, and I know that this is the catch-22, because I love to see it, but at the same time, it can scare people. So moms will come in and say, oh my goodness, my kid's doing, 2 days worth or a week's worth in a day. And other moms are like, oh, it's not enough, because they're going through it so fast. So here's what I think on this. This is my experience, is when a student is eager to learn and they're enjoying it, they can learn so much more. And so when they're eager to do it, when they're having fun with it, when they're sitting down, I couldn't get enough of education when I was a student. That's why I graduated a year early, because I would just work through it so quickly, because it was fun to me.
Spend more time with me.
We didn't do schoolwork together. Yeah, okay. But when they're yeah, that's a whole other story. When they're eager to learn, they're just going to consume it. But when they are overwhelmed, they're going to shut down. And, it's kind of like the scripture verse of even what they have is going to be taken away from them. But it's totally out of context, but it's true. When a student just shuts down, they're not going to absorb even the basic stuff that they could grasp easily, just catch on like that, because they're resistant. And so we would rather see a kid do a week's worth in a day than to struggle through it to get through 1 day's worth, because the amount that they're going to learn long term is greater when they're enjoying it than struggling through to get through a day.
I agree. I think, though, there's a caution that I would issue to the parents. we have our paradigm that we understand, which means I have to kind of not like school and I have to do this much work in order for it to count. So some people they'll short circuit the system by having the child do more work.
Yes.
And it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then I'm going to hear somebody say, but my state requires this many hours and I have to do that. The Charlotte Mason method is this. It's short lessons, long application.
Right.
Short lessons, long application. When you're talking about language, reading is so important. Good readers make good writers, but good readers, scientific studies have shown, research has shown, good readers also make good mathematicians. It also makes good scientists. Because in reading, we see patterns. In reading, we model. In reading, we can see cause and effect, and we begin developing these skills. So if your student has done a lesson, and maybe they can double up, but I don't think you need them to like do 10 lessons, because that's the equivalent of a curriculum that you tried before that broke their spirit.
Right. I'm saying for the kid that's
going.
Yeah, they just loves it and wants it.
But
even in that, what I like to call it is padding. Don't get rid of your padding. Your padding is what actually allows them to connect personally with it, whether it's through reading, whether it's through journal time. Allow your students to have other writing outlets that is not graded, that is not critiqued, that's not all the spelling has to be right, that everything has to be done right. Encourage them when they're writing to express themselves properly, even in their journal writing. I don't like the idea of just, okay, here, I want you during school time to write in your journal, write about anything you want, and you can spell everything wrong and not have proper sentences. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is saying, here's writing time. You can write on anything you want. We still want you. I'm not going to critique this. I want you to still write with capital letters and use punctuation and do a really good job. Use good handwriting. But you're not going in there and marking it all up and making them change things.
It's not an assignment. It's
right. It's for them to have practical writing skills. Maybe, they decide, hey, I want to pretend I'm a reporter, and they're going to put together a newspaper. There's a lot of things like that can interest a child that they may want to do. And if they have padding.
Right.
If they don't have padding, they're too exhausted from just studying the basic rules and grammar and what a noun is and, just all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And so we don't want to cram their day so full of that stuff that there's no enjoyment in reading. There's no enjoyment in writing. And so we want to have that padding to allow students to do those kinds of activities. So if you are taking the program and then you're filling it in with all these extra books and worksheets and things you've printed off online, you're destroying that padding that allows the student to actually practice it in the real world.
Yes.
And connecting in a way that they're going to enjoy.
So again, remember, short lessons, long application.
Yes.
Another thing that I would encourage you to do is to begin when you're talking. Language Lessons for a Living Education is a communications course. We write, but we also speak. Words are the building blocks of life.
Yes.
Without words, we have no thoughts. We have no ability for relationship. And we place little emphasis on that in education.
Right.
And that needs to be the most important, because our relationship depends on our ability to use words. Our children, we do this quite often. We have a son. My youngest son is a brilliant wordsmith. He is brilliant. He was behind me in the pool the other day, and he noticed that I'm not as gray in the back as I am in the front. And so he said, this must be what they mean when they say the grass is greener on the other side. He uses stuff like that all the time.
He does.
And we have these discussions, right, about when you use these words, how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you want to run? Does it draw you in, or does it push you away? See, this is the application side. And as homeschool families, we can use our natural relationships and communications. When you're talking with your brother and you guys need to clean your room, do you lead and do you create a teamwork through your words, or do you push them away and make them resist you and rebel against you? Because those are the things that we need, the skills to affect the culture and to be world changers. We have to be able to communicate. So the lessons start, here's a lesson, but then we can begin continuing what we're learning and developing and practicing these skills.
And I would even say, before you go in and you add all these extra worksheets in, I would add verbal exercises before I did that. Tell me about your cat. What do you like about your cat? What do you dislike about your cat? Would you like your cat to be a different color? Connect with the student. And as they get older, have them tell you a story or a narrative about something, and teach them how to say it in a more concise way. We have, one of our kids that takes tons of rabbit trails when he's telling us a story, and he's getting to the age now where he needs to learn how to communicate more effectively with his stories. And so when he tells us something, we ask him to condense it. Yes. And to, point out, okay, you told me all of this, but you also told me all these 5 other points. And really what you were trying to say is this. And so in a constructive way, not in a way that is mean and derogatory, but saying, this is what we're doing. We are trying to encourage you in this. And so as part of your school day, that is something that if they're getting done with it quickly and you need to, have so many hours logged or whatever, I would highly encourage verbal communication skills to be covered through practice, practical practice, and in a way that relates to the student.
We talked about it a little bit before we went live, but we pastored a church, and my motto was, the Lord knew me before he called us to that. And one of the things that we did was, I liked the Charlotte Mason approach to pastoring. And so I would do short lessons every week. I would build on that the next week, reinforce it a little bit, but we would keep things very short and concise. And then we would practice it heavily as a body and as a church. And because in so much of my life, I had to sit through services where the goal was, the service had to be an hour long or an hour and a half long so that the pastor could get all of his points across. And that was the quality of the church. But growth wasn't. And our goal was growth. We had to see people growing. And so to this day, now we've been gone from the church for 4 years, 5 years. 4 years. If you did this, there are people who would know exactly what this means. It means Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not unto your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your steps. So even with the journey that Kristen is on, we know that the Lord is directing our steps. He's holding us, that he cares for us. And they got that. And as a church, all the time, if we saw each other across the street downtown, they would do, hey, trust in the Lord with all your heart. It was a way that they were growing. Into this day, that's still built into the culture there. It's the same with language. And it's the growth that you're looking for. It's the skill development that you're looking for. It's not the quantity of the lesson and the amount of tears that you get.
Right.
It's, are they growing? And also, can I say, I do think it's hard, a second grader. There's a lot going on. And if your second grader loves the twaddle, then give it to them, but don't force it on them, because they've got a lot of years to learn direct objects.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is what a lot of people don't realize is grammar concepts are repeated every single year in every single curriculum I've ever looked at. And whether it's done well or done poorly, done the way I would prefer it to be done or not, it is the one thing that is true for all of them that I've ever seen. And that's because it takes students a long time to really fully grasp it all. They may get it for the moment and then forget it. Now, there's always going to be those students that just get it. I was one of those students. I learned about nouns in, I don't know, probably first or second grade. And I never really needed more reminders of that. But I don't think I was the exception. I was not the rule. And so it takes kids a long time. And even when they do grasp it, they forget about it again. Mm-hmm. They go on with things and they just forget it. And so they do need that. It's like having a familiarity with it. It gets weaved back in through their this is part of my chemo issues that I deal with. My brain kind of shuts down. It weaves through their curriculum and through their lessons on a yearly basis. So they might have some repetition within the school year, but they're going to revisit it in future years. Because I've had 5th, 6th graders say, what's a verb again? What's an adverb? They'll ask, and it only takes me a quick reminder and they get it. Oh yeah, that's right.
Right.
But it easily gets filed away in the brain. And so there's just something about language arts that specific grammar concepts, I think it's because we don't need to know when we're speaking, oh, I just use an adverb. Oh, I just use a verb. Oh, we don't have to identify that in our communication.
So language is different than math, where math,
yes.
you're developing skills and continually building complexity.
Right, because you can't do division without actually having a grasp of addition, subtraction, multiplication,
right,
and simple dividing. And so all of that kind of builds on it, and it's actually being used actively.
So it develops in complexity, but it's almost more like an art course.
Yeah, you're almost bringing it with you.
And then you're developing your complexity and your skill and your ability to communicate like an artist would continue to develop their skill.
Right. But you have to recognize that the brain, we're fearfully and wonderfully made.
Right.
And so if you don't need to know something all the time, it pushes it back. It files it away in a deeper filing cabinet that you have to go hunt for.
Right.
And that's why grammar concepts are more difficult for a student to get into that solid memory, is because the brain is always pushing it aside. Because like I said, when you're actively communicating, you're not aware of what parts of speech you're using.
Yes.
Consciously. Where if I'm doing a long division problem, I have to think about addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division along the way while I'm working it. But for grammar, you don't.
But we communicate all the time.
Yes.
We communicate up here.
Mm-hmm.
We communicate here. We communicate here.
Yes.
And I just can't stress enough the importance of application.
Yes.
Another skill is in practicing application is empathy, because empathy is the greatest cure to narcissism. And in a society that we live in that is encouraging narcissism, I think it's really important to teach our children to think about others. Mm-hmm. And what would it be like to be them? Imagine that. And,
yes.
and you do some stuff like that.
I do, yeah.
That helps try to imagine what it was like to be them, mm-hmm. and communicate that way.
Yes.
Because that's part of communicating.
And some of the picture studies are designed to do that as well, to draw them in, and what would it have been like to be this person in that picture or that person in that picture. And I also want to say something about the picture studies. I know that for some kids, they really hate drawing. I have a couple of those. I myself, I'm not very good at it. And that's why kids don't like to do it, is because they don't feel confident in it, that their work is that good. And maybe it isn't. It's not about them becoming little artists. It's okay. It's about attention to detail. But another thing that I would like to point out is that images are also communication. And so being able to use their written skills in a way, even if they're not super good at it. Again, we want progress, because even emojis are nothing but images, but they communicate volumes. That's why people are hitting like, that's why they're hitting love, that's why they're hitting wow, that's why they're giving angry faces, because they communicate something. And so we communicate not just with written word, not just with verbal words, but we communicate with pictures.
Right.
And so it is an important part of communication. It is an important skill to work at, even if it's never something that somebody's going to say, wow, I'd like to buy that because it's so good. It's still an important part of communication for them to be able to apply themselves to.
Yes. And it's interesting with our culture, right? I'm not sure if I shared that with you or not. The article on the changes of communication has never been greater, because now you can type 180 characters, but you can do all caps, which means I'm shouting at you, or I can do certain different little tricks in those 180 characters, or a couple of emojis, which now speak an entire paragraph. And so our kids, we're still, language is evolving like exponentially because of the internet. And some of the courses still teach to a very archaic model of communication that has changed significantly. And it's not that it's wrong, but we also have to be aware that our kids need to survive and thrive in a culture that's moving in a whole nother direction when it comes to communication.
And I can tell you a way that I applied a blending of the old and the new. So dictionary skills. My older kids, if they needed to know what a word meant, I used to make them look it up, which I don't do anymore. I just let them know what it means, because we have quick access to what things mean. And I also don't want to kill their curiosity and their wanting knowledge. But they still have to have a working understanding, even if they're looking something up online, alphabetical order, how do I read? Like if you type in a word, you're going to get a dictionary as part of your search engine results.
Right.
A lot of times you'll come up with a dictionary definition. Well, you still need to know, if it has an N on there, what does that mean? What can I find out from this definition? We might be able to find out the parts of speech. We might be able to find out synonyms and antonyms. So whether they're getting the information from an actual book or a search engine, they still need to have familiarity with a definition and how it works and all of that. But rather than give them pages and pages and pages of words to look up, we do look up some words, but I'm not going to beat them over the head with it, because honestly, the number of times in their adult life they're going to pick up a dictionary is next to none. And so what I want a working practical application, not preparing a student, where back in the day, all they had was the dictionary. If I didn't know what a word meant to tell them, one of us is going to have to look it up in the dictionary.
Right.
And so we were going to spend time in the dictionary. Now we're going to type it in.
Or say, Siri, what is...
Yeah, what does this mean? Yeah. So I want them to have a practical knowledge, but I don't want it done in an archaic way that prepares them for a world that no longer exists. And so, we're still taking some of the concepts of looking something up, knowing what can be found, what information, how it can be used, but we're not so focused in on it that we lose sight of how it actually works today.
Yeah, and culturally, I would say now we have 5 kids who have graduated and have moved into life, and we have the romantic nostalgia that we would like our kids to live in the world that we did, but they don't.
They don't.
And they've moved on, and they live in a culture that I even have a hard time sometimes understanding. And as hard as we've tried to keep them in 1980, they have forced on me 2020, and we have to be aware of that. Okay, so we're about to wrap up. Talk about the back of the book, because
yes.
So there's also supplements that if you want extra practice, if you want to thicken up the course a little bit, it's available in the back.
Absolutely. I did not assign these things because I don't really want them to become something that is viewed as torturous. And it's not something that every kid needs to play every game or do the copy work or whatever. So every child is different. And I did not want to approach it that every kid has to do the exact same thing regardless. Mm-hmm. And so what I did was I gave, okay, these are the foundational lessons. This is what we're going to work through as far as a basic, foundational course, which I think is pretty solid in what it teaches. But you're always going to have differences in how each individual student processes things. Mm-hmm. So you may have one student that just for the life of them cannot figure out what an adjective is. So we're going to go to the back of the book and say, do we have any copy work? Do we have games back there? What can we find? And also we have the grammar study sheets because I wanted them to have a quick place that they could look things up. So that it doesn't have to be this long dramatic, let's get a dictionary out, that sort of thing.
How to use a reference.
Right. But so we have this, okay, here's state of being verb story game. And then some of them, especially as they go on, they actually cover more than one thing. Like Simon Says covers proper nouns, nouns, pronouns, auditory perception, and physical activity. And so, we can cover one or more of these topics through a fun activity, not more seat work. Because if a kid is struggling with the way that it was presented, they're not going to enjoy more and more and more of it presented in the same exact way.
Right.
So we can add tons of repetition that every single kid out there, whether they get it or not, has to go through and complete these pages in order to be done with their schoolwork. And some of them can end up in tears and all that. We can approach it that way. Or we can just target what we do in a fun approach that is a different way of doing it. So you're getting approaches from multiple angles.
Yes.
And there's even sometimes multiple games that cover the same thing. So you might find verbs are covered in a couple of the games and you can approach it in a slightly different way. And so I wanted something that wasn't just going to be more of the same exact thing. Because if my kid is already struggling with one way that it's presented, I want it presented in a different way. Because we all learn sometimes differently, and sometimes just doing it a little different can be the light bulb going off moment.
Right.
And so, like I said, rather than making all kids do 20 problems of adjectives, let's do a basic lesson in adjectives where they're working with them. But if they need more practice, let's throw some games in there. Or maybe maybe they need some copy work or whatever the parent thinks would be the right approach for that student. Let's look in the back of the book for those.
How do I know when to use those?
Well, you're going to use them only if your kid needs them. You don't want to.
But is there a place in the schedule, or how do I know?
No, there's a list of what's in the back of the book. Go to that. So you have your teacher aids, and it tells like the spelling words, alphabet practice, copy work, days of the week, calendar sheets, contraction practices, the activities and the games. So if if your kid is having difficulty with the concept of verbs, and you want to play a game, then you're just going to go back to the game section and you're going to look through and find the games that cover verbs. The top of all the games has what the focus is.
Okay.
And so you can look real quickly by scanning, knowing what's covered by the games. Copy work, obvious, is very easy to see. Plural means more than one. That covers what plural means.
Yes.
So yeah, you're just going to come back. It's not meant as assign this every time you cover verbs.
Right.
you don't need to do a verb game for every single, you don't need to do a game for every single concept. You can do it for review. You can do it where a kid just needs that extra practice. You can do it, whenever you want, which is why it's not assigned.
Okay. So this would be part of the application side.
Yes.
Okay. So I said update on language lesson 6.
Okay. Actually, we talked about it in our meeting this morning. It's being designed and laid out. We are selecting some of the just for fun activities, selecting images right now. It's all coming together. So yes, it's coming. I'm not sure exactly when it'll go to printer. I'm thinking probably 2
to 3 weeks.
Yeah, at most it'll be sent to the printer, I'm thinking.
Okay. And then level 1.
Level 1, I am just finishing up. It's going to add some of the little more phonics practice.
It's basically basic language skills enhanced.
Yes.
To fit this system.
Yes, it's going to have a cute cover like this.
Yep.
It's going to have the same design, layout, kind of look and feel to it with the cute little kid pictures and all that kind of good stuff.
Okay.
So it has that. It is going to be, like I said, enhanced with extra phonics practice. There's things like the sentences that they're going to be reading out of the books will actually also be, they can read it from the book, but we'll also have it in here with the phonetic markings. We are actually, this is an exciting thing. We have our own Master Book font. And so we have sent out to have extra phonetic markings and some things like that so that we can use the Master Book font in here for their reading, their copy work, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we've standardized on a font that we did. I think it's in Simply K.
Yes.
Is it the new foundation font?
Yeah, it's in that too.
So we've been in the curriculum market for a long time. We've sold a lot of the major curriculums and Christian curriculums and worked with homeschool families. We know that one size does not fit all.
Right.
And so we would never say that, but this is a good combination of a lot of what we've seen with successful curriculums based also on experience through the years. And when it works and you get it, that's the hit. If you're struggling with it because it's so far outside the paradigm, I would encourage you and give you permission to say it may not work for us. We just want you to understand the heart behind it, because sometimes people are looking at it and comparing it to a public school experience or a classical education type experience, and it's a Charlotte Mason influenced approach, and so you're not looking at apples to apples, and then the confusion comes because it's like, well, my experience was apples and now you're giving me an orange, but I'm still trying to make it an apple. Hopefully that just made sense. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So we've gone long, but thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
Do you have anything to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, God bless you guys. I hope this was a help to anybody who struggles with the question of are the lessons too short, and helps give a little bit more insight into.
I just have a question. When people ask, is it enough? What is it too much? I mean, how much is enough?
Right.
How much is enough for our kids to learn what they need to learn to communicate effectively? So is it enough for our kids to learn and to be able to communicate effectively? Yes.
I think for so many people, now we're going to go long again. So many people, though, the idea is it's the fear. It's almost the FOMO in homeschooling. It's the fear of not measuring up. I got to figure that FOMO, fear of not measuring up. FOMO, I'm going to get that because that's valuable. That'll preach right there. The fear of not measuring up. And that's where my kid is in 2nd grade, and oh my goodness, they only did a 10-minute lesson. And
yeah, it's stepping back and saying, is my kid progressing in their ability to communicate? It's taking that step back and saying, You
And
know?
what about CPS? What about having Child Protective Services come because my kid didn't learn their direct objects?
Right.
That's a
But
stress.
if you dump everything on them and they're overwhelmed, you're going to have something to show, well, this is what was taught,
Yeah.
but your kid might not actually be learning a whole lot.
That's it. But I think there's a comfort or a safety blanket in saying, I have a book this big and it taught all these concepts and my kid cried all day long and they didn't really learn anything, but I did teach it.
Right.
So
Right.
that's.
And one other thing, we're going to go even longer, you know, and I know Angela touched on it with her math. These are level based. And so if your child should be in level 3 and they're in second grade, put them in level 3. If they're in 4th grade and should be in level 2, let them be in level 2. It's about them progressing and learning. They can fly through some of this stuff and learn it really quickly when they're ready to learn.
Yeah. Libby did the acronym FONMU. FONMU.
FONMU.
Yeah, that would make a great teaching tips. I may have to
Thank
do a
you,
teaching
Libby.
tips on FONMU.
FONMU. Yes.
Because it's a very real thing in
It is.
homeschooling.
It
And
is.
and we I guess we've been around it long enough that we're not concerned anymore because we can substantiate how we teach the kids.
Yeah,
and
we've seen
so-
it work.
Yeah.
We've seen it work. So, yeah.
So-
We forget sometimes some of the struggles that we dealt with years ago and have, you know, come to an understanding.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to end with that. But be sure to comment if you didn't for a chance to have 2,500 reward points added to your account. And thank you for the honor of allowing us to serve you, and to your time is so valuable, and we appreciate it and know that. So, all right, guys, God bless you. Thanks again. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you later.